Hello and welcome to the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Craft Analytics Group. My name is Ike Zhang. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and it's my great privilege to present our next talk. The topic for our next talk is the relevant and the frequent engaging in meaningful conversations with soccer coaches. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Javier Fernandez, the head of sports analytics for FC Barcelona.
Thanks. So I wonder what is soccer about? Or why do we associate words to this game, things such as complex game or unpredictable game or even beautiful game? The thing is that when we watch a football clip or any kind of game situation in soccer, I wonder how can we tell how different or similar is this to any other game any other situation of the game we can watch in a different game. Or basically, we're seeing passes and crosses and movements and shots. How can we tell what of those things are actually just frequent things that happen in the game, even which of those are random events on the game, and which of those are relevant? So that's exactly what a game analyst and a soccer coach are so experienced at doing. They have prior knowledge on the sports, on this sport, and are able to recognize with few data what is actually relevant and how to translate that to players, how to translate that to coaching and to training to actually make a difference in the game. But when it comes to data, we have seen that we can fall into committing several mistakes when we're just comparing data without watching the game or watching football footage. For example, I wanted to mention this study, or it's more or less of a not much a serious one, but it's interesting because of what it says. They start studying or comparing genes or groups of genes and proteins between human beings and animals and some other things. And they found out that just comparing the actual data, so chunks of that data, you and the person next to you are 99% similar, right? But probably you will think, no, I'm very different. I can spot the relevant things that make me different from that person. And they move further and then realize that just comparing that fraction of data, we are assumingly 90% similar to a cat. And then sounds strange because you will say, yeah, I'm not a cat. I mean, we can see lots of differences regarding humans and cats. But if you just see the data and compare that or that kind of data, it's basically more or less the same thing. Then they even went further and compared with a banana, which is a bit silly, but they found 60% similarity. So this is something that can happen to us if we're just looking at data and trying to find things that are frequent and similar, but maybe not useful for a practical term or practical sense. So what I will basically try to talk about is to provide some hints and tell a little bit of the story we have been following in the club in the last years at trying to create a data culture inside of the club and how we have moved forward towards doing that. And the first thing we found is so important to try to achieve and improve every day is speaking the same language. I'm going to focus on game analysts and data analysts and coaches, and basically to try to understand how can we communicate not in the same language in terms of Spanish, but actually to understand the game and translate the insights in the same way. So we realized that at the beginning, the first role which could work as a bridge to the coach and players was the game analyst. But at the moment, we didn't understand well what a game analyst did. So some hint, and this is the first thing, is that if you want to work for someone or provide information, valuable information to improve someone's work, you need to understand that work as much as possible. So what we first did was seeing that they were tagging lots of things when watching matches. They spent 5 to 6 hours tagging an incredible amount of things, basically to try to get data and then be able to filter the game quickly and then provide insights to the coach. So we started to do this manually. I mean, when I say we, the data analysts at the team started doing this manually to try to tag, to try to understand that work. And we found that it's a very complex work. And basically, the most important thing is that you feel tempted every time after just seeing something happening 3, 4, or 5 times to spot that as a pattern and say that this team tends to do this, and this is very, very, very common. And actually what game analysts do is to try to do that, but using their prior knowledge to see if that can be actually relevant, right? So we understood we could start trying to create algorithms to detect those patterns automatically, but we couldn't do it without having knowledge of the game. So the main idea was, let's gather with game analysts every week. And we did that every week, 1 day for 2 years, just starting simply saying, okay, let's go to the first tag, first idea. For example, a recovery ball, right? Which is a simple concept, but it's not as simple for them because there's little things that change from the common idea of what is just a simple concept as a recovery ball. And then they basically provide the idea of what that was. We went and developed an algorithm to try to tag that automatically, came back with several video clips and showed to them. They will then spot when it was right and when it wasn't right. So that's more or less a common process. But the interesting thing is that we found out in time that they start understanding what they could ask to the data. Seeing event data and seeing tracking data, they start verbalizing or explaining their concepts, every time more complex ones, in terms of the data. Things such as a high pressure is this amount of players in the last quarter and this amount of players in the second quarter and at least one player behind that. They start knowing or getting that there's some limitations on that data, but that could also explain those football terms in a middle ground between football and what is possible to achieve with that data. So the good thing about that is that in that process, we were able to create lots of building blocks of contextual information that then we could use to start filtering and understanding the game better. Things such as that from the perspective of the club, we segment or we see the game in 2 fundamental phases according to who has the ball. According to how the opponent is positioned, we have different types of positioning blocks. According to how they press and the intensity of that press is also a contextual concept. And according to the current dynamic of the game, it also changes or has an impact on what is relevant in that moment. Things such as, are we right now in a positional attack or in a counter attack? So that provides building blocks to start talking and solving questions for them. But the important thing about this, let's say, automation process, in which we went from spending 5 to 6 hours manually tagging things, we can automatically tag that in 20 minutes. And what we earn with that is not just the automation per se, but actually winning time to be able to speak. I mean, more time to communicate, more time to think about questions, think about the next thing that could be important for them. And for people that has so few time, earning time is very important. But then we started to talk about, questions and things. And something happened, or we realized about something that I like to call the language of the solutions. Or it's more about talking in the realm of solutions, right? And we want to take that towards the language of questions. So I'm going to explain this based on a case example of a concept that in Spanish is called rhythm. In English will be probably pace. I will use rhythm because I found it, better or no, more interesting. And the thing about rhythm, I'm going to go to the next one. That's right. Is what is rhythm? Right? Can we play this? Right. If you see this football footage, they basically say we want to move the ball around quickly. Can you tell how fast or how slow is that rhythm? Or is it a good rhythm? It's a bad rhythm? What is rhythm after all there? So many things going on, but actually, the reason why we can't answer if it's good or bad or up to what extent this is correct is because we actually don't know what are you trying to achieve with rhythm. So the language of solutions is the following. We ask them, what is rhythm? And one game analyst says, rhythm is passes per second or passes per minute, so passes per time. And you can measure rhythm with passes per second. And as a data analyst, you can feel very tempted when you hear things like that because you say, this is great because this is very simple to program. We can go there and then just find the mean passes per second, and we get that. So we actually did that, came with several videos, and then they start saying, yeah, in this case, the pace is fast, but it's not actually what we meant. In this case, it's slow, but good things are happening. Then you start realizing that passes per second is a solution for a problem. But what you actually want to know is the actual question, the actual problem you want to find out. So what happens when you see the same footage? Many things happen. For example, here, Griezmann is running to try to attract the defender. Junior could run there, but it's not doing that. Piqué has the ball and gets the attention of these two other players, move them a little bit, and then a great space is created inside for De Jong and Vidal. But the ball goes to Messi, more attraction of these same players, and then with this run, Rakitic opens this huge space that both Busquets or De Jong are able to attack there. De Jong could run through the inside or just try to drag players there, and Junior still can do some interesting things in the left back here. But actually, the ball goes there, and it's Rakitic who goes back and gets this space. So it's many things going on, but when we try to understand things like this with them, we realize that what you try to achieve with the rhythm is actually creating positional advantages. To be able to be in places with the largest space as possible, with the highest value as possible, with the highest potential or estimated probability of scoring goals. I can explain this concept fully for terms of time, but we have a couple of papers in the poster section and a couple of members of our team, Sergio Llana and Pau Madrero, and also Fran Peralta has a couple of papers talking about things similar to creating space and to generating positional advantages, so you can talk with them more about that if you're interested about the subject. So we came to quantify the idea of okay, how can we know if we have good or bad rhythm? And we analyzed, for example, build-ups and created a model that provide you the probability that a build-up will move forward to a progression phase or a creation phase, right? So you overcome successfully the build-up phase. So this is more or less the correlation between passes per second and the probability of progression, of overcoming the build-up. So it's basically not that good. I mean, it's okay. You can see that the fastest the mean pace is, you can have some increase of the likelihood of going to progression, but there's lots of noise. There's no clear relationship on that. When you take a look at just positional advantages, then you see that the correlation is quite different. If you're able to create those advantages, then the likelihood of going to progression is definitely higher. We could use that model itself just to talk about the probabilities, but game analysts and coaches might find very useful to use signals, to use single variables that are highly correlated to what you want to measure, so you can talk about a single thing. It's really hard to talk about a model that has several features and then outputs a probability, but you can talk about positional advantages because it's something that can be trained, it's something that can be coached, it's something that can even be shown in videos. So that takes us, for this example, a little bit away from talking about the initial solution, passes per second, to understand what they actually wanted to do and to find a new signal, positional advantage, to actually achieve that. So this goes in a process where we're able to solve this question. But something that is going to happen especially in a football club, is that probably you will have the tools to solve 85% of the question, but you won't have the time to do them in the time that is needed, right? You maybe have an interesting question on Monday, and you can have a solution, but then 7 days after, you have another Sunday match, and the question is not that important anymore, or the coach is not so much focused on that. That doesn't happen all the time. There are fundamental questions you want to solve, but more generally, if you want to actually provide a solution for something that matters to them at the moment, you need to be able to solve them as fast as possible. So the hint in this case, or the idea we thought it was going to be very, very useful, and it proved it was building a toolbox to be able to engage in that flow, in this continuous flow of solving questions as quickly as possible. So this is an example from the paper we presented last year. The EPB framework is just a part of the things we use as a framework. So what you see there basically are layers of generalizations of concepts that are important in soccer, but are not solving specifically any particular questions. Things such as, what's the expected value if I pass to any location on the field? Or how dangerous will it be if I lose the ball in any other certain location? Or a pitch control model to understand how we move in space. It's not a solution for the specific question, but different layers of information we could use as toolbox, as building blocks when we want to find a solution for the next question. But sometimes we go too far because we think things can be cool, but sometimes are not that useful. We start drawing this, for example, pitch control on top of the video, saying like, yeah, now they're going to have like an enhanced vision of what is going on the game. And the feedback of coaches was, it's cool, but I'm getting confused. Because there's already lots of information in a single soccer footage, and now you're showing me lots of colors, so it makes sense, but I cannot see things there. So we learned that in case of visuals, it proved to be more useful to focus on the specific problem you want to solve and only highlight what is relevant for the question you're talking about in that moment. So in this case, the context is we are in build-up phases. Piqué is having the ball, is actually carrying the ball, and we are highlighting the best possible passing options he has at every moment. In this case, we're just using these two parts of the model that are just saying what's the balance of risk and reward of these passes. And something you can do for sure is to criticize which players are being highlighted. And coaches might even say, yeah, I wouldn't highlight this one because we're not looking, for example, to progress through the inside against this opponent. We want to do a different thing. Or we need the young to come backward or to go forward. The important thing is not what you are highlighting in terms of numbers, but that just highlighting few things allows to focus the conversation. Then you start getting more interesting questions and engage the coaches into that flow. Just a little comment on basic stats, because now, I mean, we have overcome the time in which we start criticizing, shots and possession percentages and so on. But I want to go back on basic stats because basic stats can help you a lot to start those conversations you want to have. This happened some years ago, and we're basically actually talking about the space creation thing and some complex stuff that got everyone very confused. But then I saw this sheet of paper there with some bar chart. And then I asked for that to the game analyst and tells me, yeah, that's our number of shots in favor and number of shots against we have in every match. And this is very useful. So this has been criticized in time, like, oh yeah, this is not useful, why they use that? But actually, what this provides is an opportunity to talk about something that you might have in terms of data that might improve the information that they already find useful. So this provides a conversation, for example, or this led to a conversation on expected goals, estimating the probability of a goal, a shot to become a goal is, and basically we can say things such as, do you recall these matches where you have lots of shots but really not an increased goal chance, which is really, you can feel that it's really hard to score goals. And these other matches in which you just have 3 shots are very clear goal chances. So this is more or less what this kind of model is trying to measure. And you go to the next thing, that is EPV and so on. You can go step by step, commenting about the things you have and finding out if they find value or not in those things. So this is, for example, a plot in which every 2 minutes we basically summarize how much danger or how close we were to score goals and how much are we dominating the game. And interesting thing comes when you're able to click on one of those bars and watch the video. So you get into that communication flow. You say, basically, why is this bar so high? You can click there, watch the video, get feedback. And something that is going to happen if we don't validate with video that is so important is that it's so easy to make mistakes with the data. But when you show that in video, you're going to spot what is wrong very quickly. So it's very important to have that process, but the interesting thing is not what you're going to see in that particular video, in that moment, but that you're engaged in that conversation process. And the last thing I would like to cover is basically more or less of a statement, if you can call it that, is that real time is not the future of soccer analytics. And this has been said a lot. We're like obsessed with real time. Where are we getting to real time and technology and things? The future is teams, groups of teams, teams of people working together. And this is a little bit underwhelming because it doesn't sound that cool. But I would like to provide a couple of samples of how that looks. So this is more or less what happens to you when you're doing pre-match and post-match analysis. You're suffering a little bit, but basically it's a simulator of what could happen. If something goes wrong, you just drop off the machine and then, okay, you're gonna leave. But this is how real time could look like, right? So in this case, there's no time for doubting about the data or the stats or the concepts that you have. There's no time for, I don't like this guy much, or we don't communicate well, or this might work, I'm not sure, let's try it, because you basically can fall there and it looks beautiful, but you're probably gonna die if you do that. So we need teams that are cohesive and really know how to communicate in order to be able to solve or to reach that analysis in real time. The good thing is that the technology is there already, and it's being implemented, and it's going fast. So it's not going to be about, can we transfer video to the bench? It's not going to be about, can we get the actual tracking data and event data and the names of players? Is if we're spotting something like this left back is having issues, I mean, they're playing balls behind his back, and this happens frequently, and I communicate that to the game analyst, he needs to understand how well validated is that concept, and needs to time if he will or not communicate that to the coach. And the coach is not asking for more information because he's having a lot of pressures. He's asking for the right one, for something that can be insightful. So we need to work onto that cohesion so these kind of things can work properly. So basically what I want to say as a closing remarks is that we believe in the idea of one team, and what this means is that a data analyst needs to breathe football, needs to understand it better, or soccer, needs to understand it better, needs to know what is relevant in terms of the sports and in terms of your own club and your team. A game analyst is going to start understanding what they can ask to the data, and it's going to trust the data scientists as the people that can actually make that happen quickly. And the coach is going to start to understand that he can ask now several different questions. He can get like a more wide observation of what is possible, what is common, and what is not, and can trust this team to actually provide that information to them so we can make an impact in the game. Thank you. If you have any questions. If you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes. I don't know if, yeah, there, thanks.
So Barcelona has always tried to keep a same team playing style or the possession-based football. You cannot expect Barca to sit back and play a counter-attack against it. So even after the coaches being changed and the players come in and go out, how do you make sure if analytics has any role in making sure that you keep on to the philosophy that of a possession-based football or something like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that will depend on the process you follow. I hate or I don't like when in some part, I mean, some data scientists or data analysts in football say we need to educate coaches. I don't see an education process here. It's a learning together process, and it seems similar, but it's not the same thing. So in this case, in terms of your own game model, what you want to understand is it's going to be the same sport. It's just a different way of seeing what do we care about and how do we get there, right? So building that language is more or less about that. Is okay. How do we name these kind of things? For example, at the club we don't use war jargon, right? So you don't tackle and you don't fight and you don't think, you just try to change that. So only that change of jargon provides a bridge of communication, but then you can model that in terms of soccer, because in the end it's the same sport, but you just tailor that to the way we want to play and to enhance the things we want to achieve. Yeah. In there, I don't know. Oh, sorry.
What's the difference in communicating with Setien versus Valverde?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't like to focus on particular people. Something that is true, and is going to happen in every club, is that the communication and the actual provision of insights is going to be dependent on people. It's not just the head coach, it's the whole team and the actual people you have at the club. So if you talk about a different club, you're going to have different people and you will need to adapt and adjust the communication process to that. So basically, some coaches are more worried about some things and some other coaches are more worried about others. The thing is that there's not a huge difference on the specifics you are worried about, but how can you be able to actually solve them or solve things for them in the right way. And some coaches will like video and some coaches will like printed sheets of papers with stats. That will change with people, but I think the important thing is everyone is knowing that we believe in that process and is creating that data culture process.
So as part of the team construct that you're trying to build over here, if when you're trying to give, what are the outcomes that you've kind of achieved out of this, in sense that have you tried to simulate that if your possession is higher, possession per minute is higher, then you're getting this outcome, and then you kind of change your team construct and you play against a team. Have you tried to simulate, and how do you kind of show the impact of doing these things in outcomes?
Sure. So the thing is that we don't only want to win games. Of course, we want to win games and win, titles. But we're very worried or very intensely all the time analyzing how much of our model is being put in practice, and are we getting close to that? And why is that? Because you're gonna have new players. The competition is also changing, the sport is changing, so you need to adapt to that. So a lot of focus is on how do we quantify those things that we consider are part of the model, and then how is that evolving, and how can we also condition that to the different opponents, the moment on the season, the kind of mental pressure you might have. He wanted to make a question for a long time. I don't know if someone can bring the mic. I can see.
Hi.
Can you raise your hand? Sorry.
Okay. You spoke a bunch about conducting analysis with a specific problem in mind, and then being prepared to discuss and analyze a specific problem. So what are some of the specific problems that you have often had to work with a coach to solve?
Yeah, I mean, it can be simple things as just dominating the game in terms of having high. I mean, being very very close to the opponent box and just making the opponent not being there. It can be if you're focused on one player. Is this player adapting correctly? So is he doing what we expect, or is he doing well the behavior or the things we know we can expect for that position within the club? Is things such as can depend a little bit on the opponent as well. It's not something that we focus that much, but you might say to this opponent in particular, we can exploit these kind of things. That thing happened, or you have a game plan. Did the game plan actually materialized, or we didn't follow those kind of things, or we are changing the way we do a build-up. So little bit, is everyone doing what is requested to do now to modify that so we can go to progression phase the way we want to do it? Things like that are specific, but basically you need those building blocks to be able to solve it quickly. If you see it as independent questions, it will take a month to do them, and then maybe it's not valuable after that. He has a question for one time. If someone can bring a mic anytime, thank you. No, but not now. Please, afterwards.
So I just have one question. So like the data analytics team at Barcelona, do you guys do any kind of analysis before a coach is hired or fired?
Regarding,
like,
what's that, the last part?
Yeah, like, do you guys have a say, like, do you guys make any decision regarding this, whether a particular coach does it fits well at Barcelona?
Yeah, so the bottom line of that's something that is being said pretty oftenly when it comes to sports analytics in general. How percentage of impact does this have? The good question is how you even measure that, right? For many things. You can even have a readapter being close to a player, improving his mental concentration because he's good friends and says good things. How you even measure that? The short answer is there is an impact, and it depends from the people taking that impact, and there's time to communicate things. And sometimes you might say, this is going to happen, this is not good for this player we have, and they choose not to communicate that. So even not communicating things is a way of improving because you're going to scare the player or because many reasons. So, yeah.
So I just wanted to talk about, football is a very continuous game, and context is very important when it comes to analyzing the data and figuring out in what perspective are we going to exploit the data. So how do you see the analytics in professional football working towards breaking down the opponent tactics, and how do you see them breaking down the areas and how to create off-the-ball advantage to exploit the spaces and to create value which helps the team score goals and exploit the general defensive lapses in oppositions? And how do you see, in analytics, how do you see the perspective of that growing?
So about these several things, you mentioned these particular concepts. The question is how this can do what?
So how do you see analytics play a role in breaking down the off-the-ball advantage, breaking down the lapses in the defenses, the holes, the spaces to exploit?
I mean, the first thing is that in a competition, you have players changing all the time, and you have new players coming. So you might have a good idea of how some players behave, but for example, in case of the opponent, you can analyze that and say, okay, have you noticed this player does this kind of thing? So you can modify a little bit certain behaviors to get there, but the most interesting thing is that if you get to actually quantify those concepts, you can go to academy and the B team and the youth teams where you have players in development, right? Players that are going to do from the 6 things you want them to do, they're going to do 3 very well and 1 more or less and so on. So they have lots of room to improvement. So you can bring examples either from the first team or from their own games and then have a more visual, a more modern way of saying, okay, this is what is happening, and actually quantify that in time to see if you see some progression. Because in top players, it's going to be very hard to see that actual jumps in progressions because they're all already developed, and you have little changes there. But in youth players, you might be able to see that. So if you quantify that and it's part of your model and you bring it back, then they can have a closer way of doing that. And the most important thing is, a game analyst, a coach can at least find the clips very quickly and communicate that to the player and say, this is where it's happening and where it's not happening. So you can focus now on every player and not certain groups of players because you don't have time to generate everything you need. Yeah. Thank you. I can see you here, but I guess no more questions?
How do you all integrate the insights? Hello?
Okay, sorry. Last question, he told me. Yeah.
How do you all integrate the insights at the sort of top level with, say, the player's fitness level as well as their skill progression at the youth level and going forward in terms of players like being promoted across the youth teams and into the first team?
Yeah. So the thing is, I don't like much the idea of very high level stats quantifying things. Like this is the rating of the player, right? Or this is a skill he has now. There's so many different parts of what a player is that it's not that simple to just quantify that and name a player as a number. And the second thing is that in terms of the data we only have a picture of reality, right? You might have tracking data to tell you things about tactical with event data. You might have physical information to say things about the physical ones. But then you have a mental one, an emotional one, an emotional in terms of association with players. You have several other factors that we're not even starting to have the data to bring together. So what we do now is to bring together as much data as possible, or as many different sources as possible, because it does have an impact. And a specific example of that is if you merge physical data with tactical data, now you can shift the conversation of travel distance, which the media talks a lot about that, but doesn't provide much. But then you can at least classify that or structure that in terms of the context. So now you can start analyzing how the player is having that physical performance in case or condition it to the actual context, right? So what that provides is a new path of analysis and research. So no one is really clear what actually measures performance in those terms, but we're basically trying to merge that together and to have as much as possible to to provide something to the player to develop him or to make it better, like a better fit for the game plan. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye. Thanks. Bye. Oh, hi.